Thank you, everyone. Come on in and sit down. I know we have the Jay Carrier fan club just around his son. Thank you all for coming this evening. We are really excited for our panel presentation. I hope everyone had a second if you want to grab a snack. We do have snacks in the back. For those of you that don't know, I'm Shirley Maracle. I'm the curator here at Buffalo Art Studios. I'm going to ask you one more thing. Yes, go ahead. Can you refill everybody's water? I set the picture down and I forgot about it. She's my boss. Mario is the executive director here at Buffalo Art Studios. I'm the curator. Dane Israel is our communications and marketing person. He's running the camera. And Jane Hughes, our education director, is with us tonight too. So thank you all for coming out. And as I'm introducing our folks in our community, come on, sit down to me, that's informal. I have one for thank you. I'm going to introduce a friend of the organization, Kathy Spillman from Journey's End. Journey's End, if you don't know, is a refugee support organization down the hall. We have a very close relationship with them, and they have a special event series coming. Come on, Kathy, 1 minute, you can do it. There you go.
Thank you, Shirley, for putting me on the spot. I think I talked
Okay.
We are going to have, starting in September, our 3rd annual Western New York Refugee Film Festival. And it is our annual fundraiser to raise money for our programs and services for refugees. And we're extremely excited about it. We got Academy Award-winning directors. We're going to have opening night at Buffalo History Museum and lots of great things. Academy award-nominated films. And I do have a really crude flyer that I threw together really fast that you can grab when you leave tonight. And if anybody's interested in talking a little bit about it before we all leave this evening, I'm happy to. And we do have a website for the film festival, and it's WNYRFF. So Western New York Refugee Film Festival.org. So check it out. Thank you.
And if tomorrow morning or later in the week you remember that there was this film thing that sounded really interesting, you can email me, and I'll send you the information.
Thanks. Sure.
So thank you very much again. For those of you that are familiar with Buffalo Art Studios, you know our commitment to the arts, but also our commitment to community, and our commitment to activism, and the pursuit of justice, social justice, economic justice, and representational justice. And that's something that has driven a lot of our programming for the last 18 months, and will continue to drive our programming. So tonight's panel, as many of our panels do, it emerged as part of conversations that, as the curator, I was having with an exhibiting artist, Jay Carrier. We were talking a lot about his work and where he's shown, and it was interesting to hear him talk about being included in many Native American exhibitions. And we talked a lot about that, and you know, he's a contemporary artist, as all of these artists are. And to see the way that contemporary artists that are transnational are oftentimes categorized in a way that seems more anthropological than aesthetic or conceptual was really what drove a number of conversations. And I'm going to let each of the artists introduce themselves. I'm going to ask you to try and keep it to about 5 minutes, because we really like for this to be a conversation. So I'm going to see if we can give the microphone to everybody. I think we're long enough. And I think it'll be good. Cheryl will tell you if you're not loud enough, because that's her job. And it is good for we do want to hear you, not just for the audience here, but we do put the recording up on YouTube and on our website for people that were not able to be here. So that's another reason. I have a very loud voice, but I do ask you guys to use the microphone so everyone can hear you. So, and there is a flyer. If when you get done today and you're trying to remember who somebody is, I did include their pictures and a brief bio of each of the artists. So I'm going to pass it off to Jay here.
Thanks. Hi, can you hear me? Not used to having a mic in my face. My name's Jay Carrier. I'm a Native American contemporary artist. I don't necessarily go by the title. There's many different titles that I have: a father, grandfather, been a young child at home with my parents, up to having a studio at the NECC in Niagara Falls, New York. I originally came from Six Nations Reservation in Brantford, Ontario, a little south of Toronto, and grew up there for about 4 or 5 years, and then we moved to Niagara Falls. So I've been living in and around Niagara Falls for pretty much my entire life. The show I did here, We Took Things With Us, was kind of about that idea of taking things intrinsically, like our spirit, our religion, our people, and our ways, and putting us into a situation where we were in a fast-paced, industrial kind of setting. So it was kind of like a culture shock. But for me, my outlet obviously was always art. So I got to express what I was doing in that situation continuously, as I do today. There were periods where I dropped off raising children. I didn't do art for a year or two, but mostly I've been doing art for 50 years plus, as long as I can remember. And a lot of it stems from ideas, both social, political, cultural. So they're kind of interwoven into this contemporary J. Carey. I do exist in predominantly a mixed society, as my family is. And I read that in and out of contemporary theology that's of my own, of course. There's a lot of Native artists out there that are treading basically the same paths. So we all have different opinions on how we present and what we do with our culture. Obviously, in this area, it would be the Iroquois people, and there are a lot of contemporaries that I look up to. One of them is Rick Hill. He's a writer/artist, and he had penned something one time or another. He says, you know, the contemporaries that came out of what was considered the Turtle Native American Center at the time, he says, I consider them the, it was neo-Native expressionists. And I was like, really? I really didn't know what that means. It meant at the time, and as I mentored that around a few times, when we talk about art and stuff, he had come to kind of describe this idea of this contemporary Native person, because he knows a lot of artists, as I do, that are Native also. And he said, you know, we live in these two societies where we come from this culture that is unique. It's even unique amongst the nations across the United States, Iroquois people. And we have certain ways to do things. So although we are on the periphery of what we consider this art world, we do some really fantastic art exhibits and art pieces. And I think that that's where I learned, and I'm actually I'm influenced by some of the art making processes that the Iroquois people are doing currently and have done in the past. So this is kind of like I'm taking things from the past, things from my culture, and kind of interweaving it into a contemporary idea. But hopefully, you know, I'll continue on doing this work. I don't consider it work really. Work is work. This is a driving passion that I've always had. I'm going to go over to Jodi, and I won't take too much time.
My name is Jodi and Maracle, Mohawk. I was born and raised here in Buffalo, New York. Family from Tyendinaga, which is, if you draw a line from Syracuse-ish over Lake Ontario, it's right about there. And I wear many hats. I teach language at the University of Buffalo, and I also teach at an immersion school in Six Nations, where we teach littles in the language all day, in the Mohawk language. But as far as my making goes, my work goes, I find myself very fortunate to kind of come of age as an artist. Well, there's already been such a long lineage of particularly Indigenous women performance artists who have laid a lot of the groundwork before this generation of artists came along. I find myself in my work attempting to articulate the experience of growing up off territory in Buffalo, New York, in Western New York, and I use my work as a way to attempt to articulate kind of these experiences of being in the same place with a group of people, and they just, through no fault of their own, maybe don't know the story of the place that they're in. They don't feel a connection to the place that they're in. There's a driving question behind a lot of my work of what is our relationship to where we're at, Native or non-Indigenous or not? What is our responsibility to the place that we're at, and how does that influence our day-to-day lives and how we interact with these places? I began as a textile artist for the most part, deer hide tanning, doing weaving, screen printing, and I moved into the realm of installation works with a project at Woodland Cultural Center at a retired residential school just off Six Nations, where artists told the stories of the experiences of Indigenous children in those schools, mostly from Six Nations, Ontario. And it was through that piece that I did, a 3-story installation, that I realized I consider myself much more of a storyteller than I do an artist. I find that the stories I'm telling are not just my own, but they are stories through my personal individual lens and experiences in these places. Oh my gosh, it was just in August, as part of the Squeaky Wheel Silo City residency, I did one of my favorite pieces to date, Why Here, Why Now, and it was a piece that I conceptualized, I think, 12 years ago. It was really the story of the Buffalo Creek Reservation. A friend of mine sang some women's dance songs while I danced, but in our conversations it came up, when was the last time this land heard these songs, that this land felt these dances that are done to honor this story? When was the last time that the language was spoken in these spaces? And I find that that drives a lot of my work. And this piece here is from just something called, what is it called? A Song to the Water from a Loving Child. There it is. And that piece, I found myself really contemplating. There's a lot of, I think, politics around protecting water, around water rights, whether Flint, Michigan, or kids here in Buffalo, but it really was coming back to how do we honor our relationship to water, even if it's kind of an imperfect thing. So I don't think I can ever disentangle a cultural background from the reality that I grew up off territory, right? That I look how I look, that I come from a mixed family, and really trying to articulate that constant, I don't think of it as a duality, but just that reality. People expect you to be one thing or another, and it's never that simple. So I try to really bring forth that imperfect tension, that there aren't perfect answers in any of this. There are more questions that are being explored in hopes that they bring up more questions to whoever happens to experience these works.
Hi, my name is Sepideh. I'm from Iran. I came to Buffalo in 2013 to accompany my husband. He was going to UB to get his PhD in mechanical engineering, so different from mine. And yeah, so when I came here, basically I started with miniature and Persian painting, as you can see in my works. So when I came here, I realized that I can do something different with them. To not just repeat and repeat them over and over like a machine. And who brought this idea to me was George. He, he was my advisor at UB in 2016, and he mentioned that do something different because we don't need just realtor, painter or photographer or drawer. Do something different. So I started to mix up my culture, my history, and my experience as a woman living in an Islamic country, all with experience of living here together, and the intersection of them made me to do this stuff. So I actually broke the miniature tradition rules because they are always coming around something important to focus about the center. And where you can find them, maybe in Quran or some places that they want to focus about the content. So I brought the margin and the patterns around the word into the center and to the spotlight. Like the woman that they're not in their place, in their right place in Middle East. So I decided to incorporate these to highlight things and bring both of them in the center and just forget about marginalized women. And I work with different materials. I do photography, I do painting, and some printmakings. I use different materials to get the idea of what I want to show. The material is not really important for me. The point is just showing what I want to say. And now I'm just focusing on family. I have a 4-year-old. I am gonna have another one in May. So yeah. Yeah, that's it.
I'm going to do a quick round of applause with our two mother artists. You're going to speak George? You have a teacher. I know you can be loud.
Yeah. The reason I'm in trouble there is because I'm recovering from a spinal cord injury, so I don't want to drop the mic, but I'll be able to project. So, thank you for inviting me, Sherry, and I'm very privileged to be with a group of artists to be part of this panel. I also thank the audience for coming because it's very difficult to have several people who are involved in the arts to have a conversation. I've spent the last 3 years mostly by myself because of my rehabilitation, so thank you all for coming. So as the panelists were giving their introduction, what came to my mind was 30 years ago, I was sitting in a painting studio as a student, and I was having a debate with my classmates in art school, and I was telling them that I was going to be a full-time artist. I was going to be a painter, and I remember them telling me they're going to starve to death. But that debate kept going on for several weeks and months, and actually throughout our college days. But I was so determined. That, so as I was sitting here, that was what was going through my mind. I said, look at where I'm sitting in Buffalo, New York. And 30 years ago, I never thought I would end up in a snow city, because I grew up in the tropics. And I was born in Ghana, and I studied painting in Science and Technology, where I had my master's in art education. At the time, they did not have an MFA. So my plan was that I was going to save as much money as I could save and go to Europe, where I could see the old masters and the contemporary masters face to face. So I saved up some money. I went to Bordeaux. Paris was the first place, and then England. I stayed in England for a couple of years. That's where I met Jane, who works here. And so then we went back to Ghana. I lived there for about a year. At the time, I had a lot of clients, so we were able to live off of the sales that I made. I don't have some clients anymore. I cannot live off of painting as I did in those days. But my work has changed since then. The paintings I was doing at the time were, I would say, very descriptive and not as profound as the work I do now. Not to sound pretentious, but they were just landscapes, cityscapes, very outdoorish, but nothing critical. And so then when I came to the States in 1994, I decided to kind of step up again, you know, with the content of my work. And a few years ago, I started doing performance art, which was very similar to some of the ritualistic work that tribal Ghanaian society, especially from the fetish priests, they call it fetish priests, or stuff that concerns some of the traditional rituals. But then something dawned on me. I realized that my work was being described as very European. And what came to my mind was that the Cubists or the modernists were inspired by traditional African art. So my work looked like, you know, the modernist. So I started thinking, I have been influenced by Western because I grew up in the cities. And I'm also born from traditional African art. So I see where the similarity and the similarities were coming from, or the critique of my work was coming from. But as time went on, it did not bother me as much. I decided to just focus and work as hard as I could. And I also realized that the competition was very keen. Whereas people were interested in my work when I was growing up as a student in Ghana, here there were a lot more artists to compete with in terms of opportunities for exhibition, for visibility, and also for recognition. But I never gave up. I kept working hard. And then people kept telling me, you need the MFA, you need the MFA, you need the MFA. So I said, I already have a master's degree. So they said, no, it's not enough, you need the MFA. So my plan was I was going to paint as hard as I could to build a reputation for myself. And it did work. I remember one time, a guy came to me and he asked me, do you have an MFA? I said, no. He said, oh, we are hiring for a painter. And I think you should apply. But since you don't have an MFA, 200 people will apply for the job. So why don't you study under me? I think you can do it in a year. So this guy gave me forms, I filled them, and I found myself in Bowling Green State University. so I did the MFA in a year, 2 weeks. And I got a job in Oklahoma as soon as I graduated. And people said, Oklahoma, don't go there. It's middle of nowhere. It's Bible Belt. It's Tornado Alley. Everything I heard about Oklahoma was negative. And I said, man, this is going to be my first job, full-time job. It's better than washing dishes. At the time I was washing dishes I was washing cars, I was driving a forklift and painting every day. I said, I'm going to go to Oklahoma where I can teach painting and be able to paint. So I went, I spent 5 years, and then in my 5th year I saw an opening, and I said, I'm going. And I applied, and I ended up at UB, and I've been here 14 years. And so that's my story.
I want to start this conversation. Those of you that have attended a number of them, in the beginning I would write out lots of questions, and then I would never use them. So now I don't do as much. I really liked this thing you said, Jodi, about imperfect tension. And I thought it was a really beautiful way to talk about something I've actually heard each of you say in some way or in your own way. So I'm going to ask each of you maybe, think for a second. I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But if that idea of where that imperfect tension maybe lies in your work, and I think, Sepideh, you had told me something really interesting about your work, and I think it's more than an imperfect tension, that and how that impacts what you choose to do with your work and how that impacts your ability to travel back and forth. Do you want to speak to that for just a minute, and then we can let the others maybe speak to this idea of imperfect tension?
We actually talked about me not having a website, because I love to have a website, but if I put my work and show them to the public, I can't go back home. So because I have just woman body in my work, and that's enough to not letting me go back or arresting me or this kind of bad stuff. We have lots of people coming back from foreign countries to Iran, and they're arresting because they just talked about woman's dignity, just the right of woman, just that. So that's why I just going very slow and hiding my work. I have Instagram, but I'm not public my work. Yeah.
And I think I do want to say we have some of Sepideh's work here on display. If you are interested or if you want more information about the work or purchasing it, you can speak with her directly. We also have 2 of George's paintings over in the alcove, and then we have Jodi's video and obviously Jay's show in the front. So you're all welcome after the conversation to see more of this work. I think in your case, certainly it's more than just imperfect tension. There's a real divide in some regard between your artist self here and then the self you have to be in order to go there. But Jay or George or Jodi, do you want to speak more to this idea of what I think Jodi poetically called that imperfect tension?
Hopefully. Do you want to? Oh, no.
Okay.
Anyways, I guess when you're art making, there's always this idea of what you're trying to say and transferring it from one culture to another, or one place to another. And I work my paintings when I start them in an intuitive process. And I would like to think that some of these, the intuitions that I'm going through are the basis of how many people actually did more things. So I guess going from that idea and transferring it into a surface, what we call painting, fine arts, I think there lies that idea of tension, that idea that I do that right, that I honor our people correctly, and then I say this correctly. I guess so. I question myself along this art making process in some of these paintings that I do. Some of them take 2 or 3 years. I'll put them to the side and go back and back and back. So I guess there's that idea of the ownership of the people and the culture. Some of the works, obviously, obviously are not remnant of the designs and motifs of my people, but the spirit and what lies beneath is always right there for me. So I guess that would be that, and for that attention.
I think for me, I kind of said that it took a while to become comfortable with not giving answers and really just exploring questions. And I think that really came from an exhaustion of being the only Native, Haudenosaunee, Mohawk person kind of in a lot of spheres, and then finding myself teaching undergrads for I think I'm up to like 10 years now, and there is this expectation of what is the answer? Tell me about your people. What are your ways? What is the historical fact? What about this thing I read on Wikipedia? What about this article I read? Like this list kind of goes on and on. And for a while I was, no, I still am, very interested in like I'll say pre-beadwork, Haudenosaunee material culture, so things like corn husk twining, quill work, natural dyes, doing deer hide tanning, but I felt myself slipping into like, what is our material culture? What is like the Haudenosaunee thing? And I had to kind of reel myself back in from this way of, I think that I got used to thinking and talking about and explaining and analyzing this very academic ownership and trying to just be like, what is pen, right? Like, how do I draw the most perfect pen? And that's how I came to kind of the stuff that I think is more speaking to realities now. And yes, exploring historical or cultural experiences and communal experiences, but really just the refusal to give those answers, like holding that space. It is not my job to teach you, but it is my duty to do justice to whatever story it is that I'm choosing to pick up.
What comes to my mind concerning that imperfect dissertation? I see it in so many ways. One of it is demographic, like looking at myself, how sometimes I'm seen as a black person, sometimes I'm seen as African American, other times I'm seen as African. And one time I asked a few of my students, my advanced students, I asked them how they see me. They see me as African, or they see me as African American. And I was surprised to hear that the white students saw me as African, and the African American students saw me as African American. But there's one student who said she doesn't see me as African, but as a unique individual. I said, what do you mean by that? And she said that the stuff that I know transcends identity. And I said, why? She said, you know punk rock, you know Metallica, you know Pantera. I've never, some Americans don't even know these bands. How did you get to know that? You listen to like Tool. You know, and I said, I listen to reggae also, Bob Marley. So, but my interest in these cross, I would say maybe cross-cultural boundaries, it is because of my curiosity. So the imperfect tension is there, but also in my work, there's also some tension because I directed a Western, and people were like, a Western, George, an African. When I say I grew up watching Bonanza, you see, on TV, and during break time at school, I thought I was Michael London, who was one of the characters in Bonanza, you know. So part of it has to do with the one's experiences, one's history being obscured from what the viewer is looking at from the work. And I did a collaboration recently with a group of artists, and it's kind of like a parody, but in the collaboration, the video is actually made up of like these robotic forms, you know, and it's just my interest transcends my Africanness, and it's something that I see as a way of me responding to the question of an imperfect tension. That's how I see it.
I think that was a really great way to see your curiosity transcends. That's an interesting, it's a really interesting idea. Can you maybe point to a place in your work? So George had a huge show here, all 3 galleries, massive paintings. So I'm lucky enough to be more familiar maybe than most, but where is a place that you talk about the Western, the video, but maybe in your painting, where you are able to demonstrate some of those interests that maybe transcend?
Yeah, I grew up in the cities, you know. I was born in the capital, and my dad was transferred to the 10th largest city. So everything that I experienced growing up was kind of like city life, but very cosmopolitan. And so when I watch like American movies or listen to American music, it wasn't difficult for me to understand what was going on. So when I paint, and also being trained, you know, in college, very academic training, the content is a mixture, you know, because if I look at traditional African sculpture, some of the forms have kind of robotic features, so I combine the two, and if you study some of those like scrap figures in my paintings, like part of it is from traditional African art, sculpture, and then part of it is just my interest in robots. You know, so I bring the two together. I'm also interested in cars, you know, cars, and because my dad had about 10 car accidents, and one of them I was with him. So somehow there's a certain kind of like emotional connection, kind of trauma connected, because just imagine waking up in the morning, early morning, like maybe 7 years old, and you have this tall man, bloody, but like standing in the living room, you know, and you're looking at, that was the type of outbreak, and I had like, he had like 10 of them. And sometimes we go look at the red vehicle. And so if you look at my vehicular series, I have these red cars. But it was also a way of getting that, it's kind of venting it out of my system. And I remember in critique, the first car that I painted, I couldn't talk during critique. I couldn't open my mouth. I was shivering. And I was wondering, but it was the first one, the first therapeutic painting that I did to get it out. And then after that, it was easy. Now it became more aesthetic. So, I mean, that's how I can respond to the question in terms of being specific in relation to my paintings. Yeah. So it's a combination of my city experience growing up, and then also my interest in pop culture. I really like pop culture. I even think some of my students are not hip enough. Yeah, I don't dress hip, but when I see students who really dress artsy, I encourage them, because life is short. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah. We all need to be a little bit.
Yeah. There was a student who used to come to class every day as if she was on a runway. And I was like, yeah, that's good.
talked about that therapeutic, that pulling something out. Do any of you have an experience that you would want to share that's similar? Because I think that was interesting to hear about. If you don't want to talk about it, that's okay.
I think there's always things that we grasp onto and hold. And like George just said, it was a car for him. Mine was always like a landscape and materials that I collected in hikes and stuff like that. There was a certain place, intimacy. I would fish a lot in Niagara Gorge, and that was my way of settling my head down, my mind down. And so I go fishing quite often, 2-3 times a week, and do a long hike, 6-7 hours. So I'd be fishing, and I'd be collecting as I'm walking down the gorge in these different spots. I'd be collecting fishing line, cartilage, shells, pieces of wood, and I'd come up to Niagara Gorge with like this backpack that weighed about 50 pounds, and it was very difficult some days. So I guess there is like a certain thing that happens where you go back to these places and kind of use materials and use ideas and obviously places of trauma also. You use that and it becomes less and less, as Georgia explained, as you repeat these things as far as trauma goes. But I've always used materials in my hikes and walks, and that was to acquire a certain, I guess, intimacy with the place. People go to different places to worship religions, and they go to different places to find solitude. Well, that was my place. The Niagara Gorge was my place. So whatever I made from that particular walk, I would compile all this stuff over months and months, and then of course I would obviously make a piece out of it. So it would amount to something. And probably in the last 10 years, I've made many different pieces of materials from the Niagara Gorge and painted the gorge also. The piece I have in the show back here, it was a painting of a drawing / expedient piece of the Niagara Gorge, and behind it was done in a different style of ink, and that was a traditional longhouse that I'm from, the Onondaga longhouse. So there was my transference from longhouse to church, from longhouse to what I consider my solace is the Niagara Gorge. So there are things like that I grasp onto also, and I use.
Neither of you want to respond? You don't have to.
I just want to mention some of my experience working here with some Iranian friends, because every time I wanted to photograph and add layers on it, I asked one of my friends to come over and do a photo shoot together, because I wanted to be a Persian girl, because they know how it goes and they feel that. And all of them are like, we don't want to show our face in the pictures. We can be naked, but we don't want to show our face because that's our identity. And as I mentioned, we want to go back home. We don't want to be in trouble. And all of them are, some of them are students, some of them are UB's professors. So they're like, we're comfortable doing that, but not showing our identity. And obscuring the identity is still with them, with me, with all of us. And yeah, and every time I take the pictures, I don't have any plan to do what I want to do. And after printing them, I find feeling of my model, and then I do. I painting or print or whatever. Yeah, that's.
Is there anyone that has a question? I know I mean, I can continue to come up with questions, but is there anyone in the audience that has a question that they'd like to ask one of the artists?
You touched on when you started about the notion of being included, maybe being categorized by being an artist from how, and being included in those shows, how that, maybe about that, you know, start talking.
So one of the things that influenced me and my thought, as somebody that works in galleries, but also who visits museums, just this past weekend I was in Cleveland. I was in the Cleveland Museum with my daughter, and we were walking through the first floor, which is of course the antiquities and the older work. And we go through, there's a medieval room, and there's a Byzantine room, and because I'm me, of course I didn't go into the right order. And we traveled through the room that was Egyptian, and I'm talking to my daughter about this panel and what really was these ideas. And we walk into the African room, and my daughter has taken several classes in African history and African literature, and we were sort of struck where this rigid timeline had guided the other rooms. Suddenly, it was as though there were no timeline in the African room. And to the point that signs and labels hadn't been updated, but also that in the center of the room, in an area that was largely antiquities, were two 21st century contemporary sculptures by African artists. And what struck us first when we were looking, not just the skeleton, but hey, that's made with like bottles. And going over and looking at the labels, and it was another one of these examples for me of this sort of notion of an anthropological rather than a regional and date-based organization of artwork. So that was my thinking, and I've been thinking about this both in terms of artwork in general, but also in collecting institutions and what's guiding some of those decisions. And I think for me as a gallerist, as somebody that works in the museum world, that was what my thinking was. I don't know if any of you would like to respond to that experience of, you know, not seeing Native American or, and there was a Persian area as well, seeing contemporary art, contemporary artists, but seeing it sometimes relegated to anthropological spaces. Like George looks like he wants to speak.
Yeah. It's kind of like a catch-22 thing. On the one hand, you want recognition for your work. Like I've done a lot of work with anthropologists and all that, and because there's no other opportunity for exposure, so you just take it, you know. It's like an athlete, you know, who really wants to play, and you know, you are very committed, you train every day just like it, but then you never get anything to sign you on. So you end up playing for the community football team, you know, and it's not as exciting, but you take it like that, you know. I mean, on the resume it looks good. You know, I have a work at the Royal Ontario Museum, but they bought it through the anthropology department. You see, I'm not going to say, I don't want that. You know, they gave me money and they took the paintings. You know, it so happened that they were doing a show on flags of a particular tribe in Ghana where I'm from. Like, I'm a Fanti, you know? So they were doing a show on ancient Fanti flags. And then they approached me and they said, someone had written an article and they devoted a whole chapter on your work, and they commissioned you to do a painting since you're a Fanti. And I'm talking about Ram, you know, the Royal Ontario approached me and they said, we want you to bring those paintings. But those paintings were bad. So I think I destroyed them. You know, I gave them photographs of it, you know, because they were not inspired by me. they told me to do what, so I told them, okay, I'll do the new ones, they will be better. I cannot find the others, the first two that I did, that I played in the book. So I went ahead and did better ones because I'm now a lot more, at the time I did the first one, I was having issues with some technical aspect, but I've transcended it, so I did those two and they took it. It looks good on my resume that I have the Royal Ontario, one of my colleagues said, you mean, and he's a Canadian, he said, you mean Ram Butler? I said, yeah. That's a big deal, George, big deal, So it's a matter of choice. Some artists will do it. Because you could spend your whole life's career and never be collected by any major museum. Whole life, the whole life, that's bad, Especially if you work as hard as those other artists whose works are hanging on the walls. And sometimes artists know who is who. Like artists may be collected by a museum and they know that there's another artist who lives in a cave who is even better than them, but never gets collected, So it's always good to be collected by museums. It doesn't matter whether it's anthropological or not. It looks good.
But my criticism is that museums need to do better. As somebody working for an organization. And that was my criticism, not to these artists that sold their work, but that it wasn't placed and contextualized in a respectful way. That I found problematic because they didn't have a 21st century painting of Mary and baby Jesus in the medieval room.
They're making amends. Like just this week I read an article that Tate Modern is buying African art. They're buying it because they say they made errors in not collecting contemporary African art. They've built it, South Africa has actually built a whole museum dedicated to contemporary African art. I think it's called the Zeiss, something like that. Yeah, so there's a new, I would say, it's a new paradigm now, and like people like the kind of Wiley, doing Obama's portrait, since then a lot of museums are beginning, and also Basquiat. Basquiat is topping the auction market above and below. Can you believe that Basquiat, people used to donate, collectors to donate works of Basquiat to museums. Museums reject the works. And now Basquiat is topping the auction market, his works. So they are beginning to make, you are right, that is wrong. They are trying to fix it. It will take time.
I don't see anybody from a collecting institution, unfortunately, here today. Or I have pressure. Does anybody else have a response to that idea too?
I think really, as far as like Native art goes, Native American contemporary art, the lines, because this has been hashed out in so many different ways for so many years by my forebears, the people that came before me, as artists. And I think the lines kind of have been drawn as far as like the collecting authentic, historically correct Native American artifacts, and as opposed to maybe contemporary art and people that do contemporary art. And them lines have been already kind of hashed out. Although I did have an experience when I was in Chicago, going to school in Chicago, and I seen, there was we went to this museum, it was / museum, art gallery, art show, and we went down in the anthropological section in Native American, and down this big, beautiful, this very ornate case, and at the bottom of these stairs, it was in the lower level part of this museum, this Native American collection, was, there was a mask. It was a False Face Society mask, and you're not supposed to show them in museums. And so I was with a couple friends, we were kind of on this food trip thing, and I stopped in front of it, and it was just riveting, and I lost my mind. This thing was just like, it was talking to me, you know, like getting me out of this. It was in a display case, and it had hair, and it had, what we do is, there's a ceremony with the tobacco on this, for the ceremonies that are taking place in the Longhouse. So, it had the tobacco on it, and it was what they call a crooked nose. It was a red false face. It had big, long hair, horse hair. The nose was crooked, and it had the lines on the side of the face with the eyes. And the tobacco was there. And I asked the curator there, I went up front and asked them what they were doing with that and why they were displaying that. That was a very sacred object from the Iroquois people, Haudenosaunee people, Longhouse. And he didn't have an answer, but he said they would contact the curators of that particular department and have it possibly removed. Never heard from him again, of course. But it was like seeing a long lost brother there. So there are artifacts out there that are in these museums that were taken from some of these tribes. And like I said, as far as like the anthropological part of it, they were extracted from these societies, from these different cultures and different tribes across the United States. They still exist in these museums, and they should be given back to these individual tribes. But a lot of them still exist in these places. But going back to the original question, I think the line has been drawn as far as what is contemporary Native American art and what would be maybe something like a museum quality pieces of that. And I think that's already been hashed out. So we don't cross too many lines when it comes to stuff like that.
So Jake, do you feel that now that those lines have been crossed, that there's still opportunities for you to showcase your contemporary artwork?
100%. I don't. As far as where I'm from, the people are from, and I don't partake in the ceremonies too much anymore. But I don't cross that line of there's a taboo where I can't do certain things, and I don't entertain people with that thing. But I do, I am a contemporary artist, and I do extract things and take things from different parts of my culture. There are taboo things that I do not cross.
Marilyn, did you get a question? I said raise your hand.
I'll try and I know what I want to ask, but I don't know if I know the right way to ask it. But to me, it seems like each artist, you're communicating your own story, as well as the story of your culture and the history of your culture. And I'm wondering if you think of it that way, like in your pieces individually, as well as in your body of work, like, is there sort of a storyline about, like, I was young and this, like what you were saying, George, and then my adolescence, and because you're doing it beautifully, but I think we all kind of want to tell our story in some way, maybe verbally, or maybe through music or literature or something, but do you feel that when you're creating, that you have a story to tell in your work? Did I ask that in a way that's understandable? I know what I'm trying to say, but I don't know if I can say it.
Yes, there's content, I have a certain type of content, and I think that as the years go by, I've figured out a way of expressing that content, but not making it too direct, like, yes. I don't illustrate, I allow the painting to grow. All that I do is I prune it. I prune the painting like the way you prune a plant. I graft the way you would graft, like two different. Because when I start a piece, I just start with an abstraction. I just start without, and if I have an idea, it's vague, because of the way I work. I never used to work like that, but I think that after working for so many years, you transcend the technical requirements of the medium. You become the medium. The medium is no more a mystery. You understand and you know what it can do for you. So my work is project-based. Like I have years I'll be working on a particular theme, but I have an overarching content, which is like the history of colonialism and its relics, you know, how its legacies and how it somehow reflects contemporary issues or problems, social political issues. So it's kind of very subtle. But the work also kind of evolves sometimes towards being more abstract and less objective. You know? So every time period I have something I'm working. That's why my work is project based. I have a content, sure I do. In my mind. Because before I would just paint. As a student, you know, I would paint a cup, paint an apple, or paint a portrait, same day, but no more. Now it's more strategic. Yeah.
I think that's exactly what I was wondering.
Jodi and Sepideh, I see you nodding. You went to an example too? Either of you?
Yeah, I mean, because when I started looking at doing surveillance photographs, I was doing the same thing. It was basically a theme of having first photographer in Iran, and I altered his works, and yeah, that's the same thing that I did.
I think for me, in terms of like a story versus an experience, this kind of goes back to your question about like moments of trauma or exploration or personal exploration or healing. You know, there will be these moments I experience, and kind of like in a flash, I don't know what the outcome will be, but I'm like, this is the thing, the experience, the memory, the thing my kid said, that is laying the foundation for this piece. And there's kind of this stockpile of pieces yet to be made in my head, and it could be something I overheard in a bar somewhere. It could be some beautiful thing a 5-year-old told me at work. It could be a moment on a beach that becomes a very cold, splashy experience called art. You know, and I think that it's not so much about this chronology. It's not a purposeful chronology of this is my childhood, this is my becoming, this is my motherhood, this will be my middle age and my golden years, etc. But it is this way of it's these stretched out moments. It's feeling the weight of these moments. We're stitching together the same conversation and the same moment on repeat with all these different people into a single work to try and just, at least for me, get that away from me, instead of it just kind of sitting here and stewing and distracting.
I was not so much thinking chronology as I was just,
I can't hear what.
Sorry.
oh, I was just making a comment. I'm sorry.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead.
I want to ask you all my recent favorite questions. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is like other words for art. So, you know, the example that I have is like, I think, you know, the word gift instead of art, because that makes me think about reciprocity and that. I know Jodi, you mentioned storytelling. So I'm curious if you all would, if there's another word other than art that you would describe your work as, or that you feel that like might like, you know, or not necessarily another word for it, but like something that sort of like helps sort of, you know, give it a bit of weight.
Meditation.
Yeah. Ritual, I've heard you use that word before too.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when I approach my studio space, I know I'm going to be painting that particular morning. I look at people morning until the early afternoon, whatever it might be, 2, 3, 5. So there's a certain thing that I do every morning. You know, and I call it the ritual, and it deviates a little bit once I start applying what I'm doing as a project. And it could be, you know, part of the ritual might be sitting on a chair and watching the sun come up. and it's kind of a form of meditation. And kind of clearing my thoughts. It's my kind of my holy space. Is my studio. I look at that as a very like a person would look at walking into a church. I look at walking into my studio in the same regard. So when I'm in that space, I kind of, every once in a while I'll smudge, I'll burn tobacco, I'll say a prayer. And every once in a while I'll paint by candlelight. So there are certain rituals that I guess get me into that zone of kind of, this intuitive thing that I'm going through, called painting, making art, making objects. I tend to say it's a ritual, and it happens during the art making process also. It's not only sipping on coffee and watching the sun come up. It's not like a meditation like that. There's actually movement involved, body work. There's actually dancing, footwork, and it all takes place in my own private place, that space. That obviously viewers of pieces of work, they don't get to see that. They don't get to see that privacy, so to speak. And I'm sure many, many, many artists before us have done something of the same thing. Whether you know that or not, if you're an artist, there are certain things that you do when you enter spaces like that. And like I said, I consider my studio very similar to a church or a roundhouse or some place that's very sacred.
Anybody else have a word? Jodi, you look like you have a word.
I just want to say, I like this word I use in my bio more, story making. Like, I spent time thinking about it instead of just talking off the cuff there. Just because I think that it is, like, storytelling to me has this really cheesy, like, oral tradition, like, connotation weight to it sometimes. But, like, this process of story making is kind of piecing together these stories and kind of offering them up. And I think that it's a way, too, that in some way, inherently anybody who is there or sees it or hears it or smells it, I try to use smell as much as possible in my work, and they inherently are part of making that story because they are only getting a small piece of it. Like the piece that's on a loop, it's a 21-minute loop. Few people are going to sit there and watch this whole loop and be like, here's the entire piece, and now I get the thing, and it's great and wonderful, hopefully. And rather, they're getting these snippets, right? They're going to be like, why did I just look at the sky for 3 minutes? Why is this lady cold and shivering? Why is this lady wearing these old-timey clothes? Like, all these different things are part of the story that people are making at the same time, that they're choosing how much effort they will or will not put in, or time they will or will not put in, or their openness to kind of what is this whole kind of sensory experience, this response that I'm having, which is where the story making word came from. But I liked your comment about these rituals and these dances and this thing that just happens in these movements, this rhythm to things when you're going through the process of making, because that's something that I found comfort in, whether it was using a spinning wheel or weaving or the dancing or even like how I decided to arrange things in a space. Like it just kind of comes over you, right?
Exactly.
Do you have another word, or George, do you have a word that you guys like to use?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, actually. I've been thinking about it because as soon as you ask that question, the first word that came to my mind is vitality. But then I thought about it and I was like, the whole process of creation is too complex for one word to describe it. And then as I was thinking about the word vitality, the other word that came to my mind was filtration. Filtration, because, like as an artist, and I think most of you feel the same, you have so many ideas going through your mind constantly, but they have to wrestle. These ideas have to wrestle, and the most predominant one becomes what comes out, as a work of art. And so it's like you know, getting like this muddy water that goes through this filter and it comes out the other end as pure, vital essence, you know, and that becomes the work that you keep. Because when I work, I have to like erase and it's like the first draft is not always what you send out. You have to edit it, you know. So that's what it's difficult for me to use one word to describe it, but I think, you know, filtration, vitality. But there's one thing that keeps nudging me in the back of my head, audacity. You know, because a lot of people have great ideas, but they don't have the confidence, the conviction to say, this is what, because to put yourself out there through your work, it's not easy, you know, because, you know, people might just say it's bad, and, you know, you have to have a thick skin, you know. That's why I say audacity is very important, especially if you do it through your whole life. Because I know some artists who just stopped. They stopped working, you know. They can't take it anymore, you know. So it's like Escape from Alcatraz. You see, there was a character who, when they took his brushes, he cut off his arm, he gave up. But then there were other people who were planning to escape, and he escaped. You see, and I think that's what the artist does. The artist with audacity escapes.
I think it's interesting that, Ekram, you asked about the object, and the artists all talked about the action.
Yeah, the process.
The process, that was the end that you all really addressed. I think that's an interesting, not surprisingly, having worked with artists for 25 years. Does anybody else have any questions? We are, it's a little bit after 7, and normally when we do these panels, one of the things we'd like to do is we try and start at 6 and try and end at about 7:15. Not because we're ending the evening, but we want to shift the structure. So what that means is we're going to get up, and the people that are part of our Buffalo Art Studios community are going to help us move some of the chairs so that you can look at the artwork. We still have snacks, I'm assuming, around the corner because we tend to. We still have our bar. So it is not that we want people to leave. We just want to change this sort of formal structure of audience and panel into conversations and encourage you to talk to the artists directly. You can talk to us. I have to do one more bit of selling, and that is, in case you don't know, Buffalo Art Studios' annual fundraiser is 2 weeks from tomorrow. It's live on 5. We can sell you tickets tonight. We also have tickets for sale online. We're taking over the entire 5th floor. You're at one very small end. It's 100,000 square feet. We have 20 businesses and artist studios that are going to be opened. We are going to have one set of bands, so we have 4 performances in this Joanna Angie Gallery. We have another open studio at the other end that's going to have another set of bands. And we are also going to have a 5x5-inch art sale for $25. You can purchase it off the wall. As of this morning, as of this afternoon, 552 artworks donated, and because I've been working with artists for 25 years and tomorrow is the absolute for real deadline, I think we're going to get close to 600. So the tickets are $20 pre-sale, $25 at the door. You will have a lot of fun for that $20. We have food from West Side Bazaar. So please come back and enjoy our community. We have wonderful, serious, I think,